The grand deliberation chamber smelled like recycled air and old arguments. Ambassador Torek Vasan of the Kirith Dominion shifted his weight on the stone bench, carved 9,000 years ago to fit a Kirith spine, still uncomfortable, and watched the facilitator drone through procedural language that could bore a corpse back to death. 43 species, 12,000 years of galactic civilization, and somehow, every session still started with someone reading aloud from a document everyone had already read. Torek let his gaze drift across the chamber. The Alori delegation glowed a self-satisfied teal. The Dravesh sat in their sealed atmosphere pods, their translator units humming like broken refrigerators. The minor species filled the upper tiers. The Tesek, the Uwuri, dozens of others whose names Torek kept on a datapad because he could never remember them all. And then there were the humans. They sat in the mid-tier section, right where they'd been assigned 40 years ago when they first joined the Concord. Not the upper galleries with the minor species, not the lower floor with the elders, the middle. A polite, non-committal middle that said, "You're here, but let's not get carried away." Torek had always liked the humans, in the way one likes a neighbor's well-behaved pet. They showed up on time. They volunteered for things no other species wanted to do. Border patrols, medical missions, infrastructure surveys in dead-end systems. They smiled too much and apologized when they hadn't done anything wrong. Eager, earnest, a little exhausting. But today, something was off. It was like hearing a familiar song played in a slightly wrong key. The human delegation was present, seated, dressed in their usual dark formal wear. But the energy had changed. Their lead ambassador, Helena Vasquez, sat with her hands folded on the desk in front of her. No datapad, no notes, no coffee. And humans always had coffee. Torek had once joked to a colleague that if you wanted to cripple humanity, you didn't need a fleet. You needed to destroy their coffee supply. Helena wasn't smiling. She hadn't smiled in 3 sessions, Torek realized. He'd noticed and filed it under "not my concern." The junior human staffers, usually the loudest networkers at every reception, shaking hands with anything that had hands to shake, were quiet, still. Some of them had cleared personal items from their desks. Small things. A photograph here, a pen holder there. Torek noticed this the way a lizard notices a shift in air pressure. With instinct, the facilitator called the vote on Resolution 1-1447. It had a proper bureaucratic name, the Redistribution of Emergent Navigation Corridors Act, which was the Concord's way of making theft sound like accounting. The resolution would transfer control of 17 FTL pathways built by human engineers, funded by human resources, and maintained by human crews to a joint oversight body controlled by the 3 elder species. The justification was standard. Humans were an emergent civilization, and critical infrastructure required established stewardship. It was, in plain language, a mugging dressed in a policy brief. Torek voted yes. He didn't feel great about it. He also didn't feel terrible. The humans had built impressive things, certainly. But the galaxy ran on hierarchy, and hierarchy meant the elder species managed the important systems. That was how it worked. That was how it had always worked. The humans understood this. They had to. The vote passed 34-9. The humans voted against. So did the Tesek, and a handful of other minor species who ran their trade through human-built corridors. It didn't matter. The Elder Coalition had the numbers, and the numbers were the only thing that had ever mattered in this chamber. Facilitator Owen, their bioluminescent skin pulsing a calm administrative blue, turned to the human delegation. Standard procedure. The losing side was given the floor for a response. Everyone knew what came next. A speech, measured disappointment, a gracious acceptance wrapped in a request for future consideration. The ritual of the outvoted. Torek had seen it 1,000 times. Every species did it. You lost, you made your little speech, you sat down, and the galaxy kept turning. Helena Vasquez stood. She looked at the chamber, not at the facilitator, not at the elder delegations. She looked at the room itself, the ancient walls, the carved stone, the holographic emblems of 43 civilizations glowing in their designated sections. She looked at it the way someone looks at a house they're about to leave for the last time. "We thank the Concord for its clarity," she said. 7 words, no emotion, no protest, no disappointment performed for the audience. Just a sentence as flat and final as a door closing. Then the humans stood, all of them, every staffer, every aide, every junior diplomat. They stood at the same time, in the same motion, like a single organism unfolding. They collected their materials, folders closed, data pads tucked into cases, bags already packed. Already packed. Torek felt the cold thing then. It started behind his ribs and spread outward, a slow frost he didn't have a name for. They hadn't packed just now. They'd packed before the session. They had known how this would end, and they had prepared not to argue about it, but to leave. The human delegation walked toward the chamber doors. Not fast, not slow, not angry. The way people walk through an airport when their flight is confirmed, and there is nothing left to do but go. No one stopped them. That was the strangest part. 43 species in that room, thousands of diplomatic staff in the halls beyond, and not a single voice called out. Not because they didn't care, because they didn't understand. This didn't happen. Species didn't leave the Concord. The Concord was galactic civilization. Leaving wasn't a political act. It was conceptually impossible, like a fish deciding it was done with water. The chamber doors opened. Helena Vasquez walked through without looking back. The doors closed behind them with a sound that was too soft for what it meant. Torek stared at the empty seats. The human section of the holographic wall, the blue-green marble of Earth spinning in its little designated frame, flickered once. Then it went dark. The silence in the chamber was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of a room full of people who had not yet realized what had happened to them. Like the moment after an earthquake, before anyone checks if the building is still standing. Facilitator Owen's skin cycled through 3 colors in rapid succession: confusion, alarm, and something Torek had never seen on an Alori before. Something that looked a lot like fear. "We will take a brief recess," Owen said. Torek didn't move. He sat in his ancient stone seat and looked at the empty desks where the humans had been. Small metal plates, standard issue, with Earth, United Nations delegation etched in Concord standard. The nameplates were still warm from their hands. He kept staring at those desks long after the other delegates filed out, long after the chamber lights dimmed to standby, long after the cleaning drones hummed through on their nightly route and paused at the human section because there was nothing to clean. Torek Vassin sat in the empty chamber and tried to name the cold thing behind his ribs. It wasn't anger. It wasn't confusion. It was the feeling of standing in a building and hearing for the first time the sound of load-bearing walls beginning to crack. 48 hours after the humans walked out, Facilitator Owen of the Alori Collective floated in the center of their private chamber and told themselves that everything was fine. The humans would come back. They always came back. They were young, emotional, prone to dramatic gestures that looked impressive but lacked follow-through. This was a tantrum, a negotiation tactic. Within a week, Helena Vasquez would send a message requesting a meeting, and the Concord would graciously allow the humans to return with some minor concession that would let everyone save face. Owen had seen this before. Except they hadn't. Not once in 12,000 years of Concord history had an entire delegation walked out. Species had threatened to leave. Species had boycotted individual votes. One species, the Vren, had recalled their ambassador for 2 months in a dispute over mining rights 3 centuries ago. But a full withdrawal, with packed bags and a dark emblem wall? Never. Owen's skin pulsed an involuntary amber. They forced it back to neutral blue and opened their morning briefings. The first message was from the human embassy on the spire. Or rather, it was about the human embassy, because the embassy itself had gone dark. Sealed doors, communication channels closed. The staff, all 46 of them, had retreated inside within an hour of the walkout. Security scans showed they were still in there, alive, just silent. The second message was from Concord Administrative Services. It was flagged routine. It was not routine. Overnight, the Concord's automated systems had received 163 formal notifications from Earth's government. Not declarations, not protests, paperwork, the quiet kind. Termination of bilateral research agreements, withdrawal from joint scientific missions, cancellation of personnel exchanges, recall of human medical staff from 14 off-world postings. Owen read the list twice, then a third time. The medical recalls alone covered 6 Kireth border colonies, 2 Alory research stations, and a Dravesh habitat ring. The humans had been running plague treatment programs on the Kireth borders for 6 years, free of charge. They had been staffing an Alory deep space observatory because the collective's own scientists found the posting too remote. They had been maintaining water purification systems on 3 Dravesh colonies that the Communion had simply never gotten around to fixing. Owen had not known about the water purification systems. Owen suspected the Dravesh hadn't either. The third message was from the Kireth Dominion's health ministry, and it was not calm. The human medical teams on the border colonies had begun packing. The Kireth officials on site were asking what was happening. No one had thought to. Owen closed the message and floated in silence for a long moment. The emergency session convened at midday. The Elder Coalition filled the lower floor. The minor species sat in the upper tiers, quieter than usual. The human section remained dark. Ambassador Torek Vasin of the Kireth arrived looking like he hadn't slept. His scales had the dull, grayish tone they got when a Kireth was under stress. He took his seat without greeting anyone. The Dravesh ambassador, a being named Counselor Hosh, spoke first. His translated voice came through with the usual mechanical flatness, but his words carried the particular confidence of someone who had never been wrong about anything and saw no reason to start now. The humans are posturing, Hosh said. They depend on Concord trade networks for 60% of their external commerce. They cannot sustain independence. Within 30 days, economic pressure will bring them to the table. I recommend we do nothing and allow reality to correct their behavior. Several delegates murmured agreement. Owen watched the room and said nothing. A Tessic delegate in the upper tier raised a manipulator arm. The Tessic were small, 6-limbed, and easy to overlook, which was, Owen reflected, probably why they got along so well with the humans. Facilitator, the Tessic said, our Commerce Office has received a trade proposal from Earth's government, directly, not through Concord channels. They are offering us preferential tariff rates on 3 categories of goods we currently import through Kireth intermediaries. The murmuring stopped. When did this proposal arrive? Owen asked. 6 months ago, the Tessic said. We were not sure what to make of it at the time. We are beginning to understand. 6 months. The humans had sent trade proposals to minor species 6 months before the walkout. This was not a tantrum. This was a plan. Owen sent a private message to Helena Vasquez that evening, through a back channel they had used for informal conversations over the years. Owen kept the tone light. Professional concern. A gentle suggestion that perhaps the humans might consider reopening dialogue. Helena's response arrived in 11 minutes. 1 line. The Concord made its position clear. So have we. Owen stared at the message and felt their skin cycle through colors they couldn't control. They closed the display and called for the intelligence briefing they'd been putting off. The briefing was delivered by a Kiraith military analyst who spoke in the clipped, precise tone of someone delivering very bad news in very organized sentences. Human fleet movements had been detected across multiple sectors. Not aggressive positioning, not the massing of warships at borders that would signal a threat. The opposite. The humans were pulling back. Every ship assigned to joint patrol duties, every vessel supporting Concord peacekeeping operations, every human military asset operating in shared space was moving toward human-controlled territory. 12 systems along the Kirith-Alori border that human ships had been quietly patrolling, voluntarily without formal agreement, simply because someone needed to and no one else had bothered, were now unguarded. Those systems sat on a corridor that pirates and smugglers had used for centuries. The humans had kept it clean for the last 15 years. No one had asked them to. No one had thanked them for it. And now, no one was doing it. How long before piracy resumes in those corridors? Torek asked. It already has, the analyst said. We lost contact with a Kirith merchant convoy 6 hours ago. The room went very still. Counselor Hash broke the silence. This is coercion. They are deliberately creating a security vacuum to force our hand. Torek turned to look at Hash with an expression Owen had never seen on the old Kirith diplomat's face. It was not anger. It was something tired and sharp at the same time. They're not creating a vacuum, Counselor, Torek said. They're leaving one. There's a difference. They were filling a hole that we never acknowledged existed. Now they've stopped. That's not coercion. That's what happens when someone puts down a weight they were carrying for free. Hash said nothing. The Auri delegation withdrew from the Concord the next morning. Their statement was 4 words long. We thank the Concord. By afternoon, the Falami followed. Same words. Helena's words, spreading through the galaxy like a quiet infection. Owen floated alone in their chamber that night, skin cycling through colors they had given up trying to control. On the display in front of them, a map of galactic infrastructure glowed in the dark. Every system, every trade route, every station, every medical outpost, every patrol corridor where humans had contributed resources, labor, expertise, or simple warm body presence was highlighted in red. Owen had expected a few scattered dots, peripheral contributions, the kind of minor support work that a young species did to earn goodwill. The map was drowning in red. It covered the Kirith borders. It threaded through Alori research networks. It wrapped around Dravesh colonies. It connected minor species who had no direct links to each other except through human-maintained routes. It was everywhere, in everything, so woven into the fabric of galactic civilization that removing it wasn't like pulling a thread. It was like pulling a spine. Owen dimmed the display, floated in darkness. The humans had not been a junior member of the Concord. They had not been an eager young species trying to earn a seat at the table. They had been the table. And the elder species had voted to saw off its legs. Fleet Marshal Draven Coe stood on the command deck of the carrier, Endurance, and watched the stars through the observation window with the calm of a man who had been expecting this morning for 2 years. The Endurance was not a warship, despite what the Concord's intelligence services would probably assume. It was a logistics vessel, the largest humanity had ever built, designed to move supplies, personnel, and equipment across distances that would have made the elder species sweat. It was not elegant. It was not impressive to look at. It was a box with engines, built to do a job. Draven liked things that were built to do a job. His communicator chimed. Helena Vasquez's voice, relayed through a secure channel that ran on human-built encryption through human-built relay stations. The Awuri and Folami have formally withdrawn, she said. Tessek are signing the bilateral treaty today. Vren tomorrow. That's ahead of schedule. Turns out being openly robbed by the people who call themselves your leaders tends to clarify things for the smaller nations. Draven almost smiled. Almost. How's the Concord taking it? Hosh called it a conspiracy. Torek called it a consequence. Owen hasn't said anything publicly, which means Owen understands. They'll start talking about war soon. They'll talk about it. They won't do it. You sound sure. I am sure. He was sure because he had spent 30 years in Earth's military and had studied every species the galaxy had to offer. And he knew one thing that the elder races had somehow failed to learn in 12,000 years of watching humanity from a comfortable distance. Humans were not peaceful because they were gentle. Humans were peaceful because they had spent 10,000 years being extremely, creatively violent, and had decided collectively that they were done. The difference mattered. A peaceful species that had never known war would react to a threat with panic, confusion, moral crisis. A peaceful species that had chosen peace after centuries of bloodshed would react to a threat the way a retired boxer reacts to a drunk swinging at them in a bar. Not with fear, with a tired, precise awareness of exactly what they could do if they decided the leash was off. The elder species had never seen the leash. They had only seen the smile above it. Draven turned from the window and walked to the operations center, where his senior staff were running the activation sequence for Project Threshold. Threshold was not a weapon. It was not a fleet deployment or a military strategy. It was an infrastructure network. 17 parallel FTL corridors that bypassed every Concord-controlled transit point in the galaxy. Humanity had been building them for 8 years in deep space, in the gaps between star systems where no one looked because there was nothing worth looking at. The corridors used a variant of FTL physics that human scientists had developed independently, not stolen from elder species research, not derived from Concord databases, but built from scratch in human laboratories by human minds that the Concord had dismissed as derivative for 4 decades. The corridors connected to trade hubs pre-positioned in neutral space. The trade hubs connected to agreements pre-negotiated with 17 minor species. Species that the Concord had spent centuries ignoring or exploiting or simply forgetting about. The agreements connected to supply chains, resource exchanges, mutual defense pacts, and scientific collaborations that together formed something the galaxy had never seen before. An alternative. Not a rival empire, not a rebellion. Something the Concord strategists would struggle to understand, because it didn't fit any model they had for conflict. The humans hadn't built a weapon against the Concord, they had built a door out of it, and they had held it open for anyone who wanted to walk through. Draven remembered the briefing where Helena had laid it out. 2 years ago, a secure room on Earth, 6 people at the table. Helena had stood at the front, with no slides, no presentation, no visual aids, just her voice and her exhaustion. "They'll come for the lanes," she had said. "It's the only thing we have that they want badly enough to take openly. When they do, we don't fight, we don't protest, we leave. And when we leave, they need to understand that leaving means something. Not because we punish them, because we stop carrying them." She hadn't been angry. That was the thing Draven remembered most. Helena Vasquez had spent 22 years as a diplomat in the Concord. She had believed in it. She had argued for human patience, human engagement, human contribution as the path to earning real respect and real partnership. She had believed that if humanity just kept showing up, kept being useful, kept proving its value, the elder species would eventually see them as equals. She didn't believe that anymore, not because she was bitter, because she was honest. On the Concord spire, Draven knew things were falling apart in the slow, dignified way that large institutions preferred. Emergency sessions that produced no decisions, intelligence briefings that produced only alarm. A growing awareness, spreading like dye in water, that the humans had not been a minor convenience. They had been a structural necessity. Concord intelligence had finally cracked what threshold was. The reports reached the elder delegations on the same day that the Tessec formally allied with humanity. The first species to sign a full partnership outside the Concord framework. The Concord held a closed emergency session. Elder species only. Classified. Draven didn't have the transcript. He didn't need it. He knew exactly how it would go. The Dravesh would call for military action. Someone, probably Torek, because Torek was smarter than the rest of them, even when he was wrong, would ask one question that would end the conversation. Helena confirmed it 3 hours later. Torek asked how many wars humanity has fought among itself, she said over the secure channel. And someone looked it up. The room went quiet. The Dravesh have fought 4 wars in their entire history. The Kireth, 6. The Alori, none. They outsource their fighting. Humanity's count is in the thousands, and those wars produce the exact kind of military experience and institutional knowledge that you do not want to test unless you are very, very certain of the outcome. The war proposal? Dead on arrival. Draven closed the channel and walked back to the observation deck. Through the window, he watched the first human trade convoy move through Threshold Corridor 7, a chain of cargo vessels and escort ships gliding along a route that no elder species controlled, no Concord authority governed, no ancient institution could tax, or block, or redistribute. A new road, built not in defiance, but in necessity. Not to destroy the old world, but to survive without it. Other convoys were already forming. The Tessec had 3 ships loaded with rare minerals heading for the Threshold hub at Oryx Point. The Awuri were sending agricultural transports. The Folami had committed their entire merchant fleet. 22 species and counting, all choosing a door the humans had built, because the house they'd been living in had locks on every room, and someone else held all the keys. Draven stood at the window and breathed. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He felt what he always felt at the end of a long operation. Not triumph, but a slow unclenching. A release of pressure that had been building for so long, he'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight without it. 40 years of patience. 40 years of smiling at insults and volunteering for thankless work and being called emergent by species who couldn't fix their own water systems. 40 years of Helena and diplomats like her saying, "Not yet, not yet. They'll come around. Just give it time." Time was up. Behind him, the operations center hummed with activity. Ahead of him, the convoy lights dotted the darkness, like a new constellation being written in real time. Draven exhaled. It felt like putting down something very heavy that he had been carrying for a very long time, and that no one had ever asked him to carry, and that no one had ever noticed he was holding. 6 weeks after the humans left, the plague came back. Torek Vassin read the casualty reports on his datapad during the morning transit to the Concord Spire, and the numbers sat in his stomach like stones. 47 dead on Kirith Colony Vesca 3, 112 on Vesca 7, 300 on the orbital habitat above Vesca Prime, where the human medical team had operated a treatment center out of a converted cargo bay for 6 years. The cargo bay was empty now. The human doctors were gone. They had packed their equipment, transferred their patient files to the Kirith Health Ministry, and left on a transport ship 11 days after the walkout. They had been professional about it. They had offered a 60-day transition period. The Kirith Health Ministry, confident that the situation was manageable, had declined. The situation was not manageable. Kirith medicine could treat the plague. That was true. What Kirith medicine could not do was treat it at the scale the humans had managed, with the speed the humans had managed, using the field hospital methods the humans had invented during centuries of fighting diseases on their own chaotic, overcrowded, war-scarred planet. The humans had not been doing anything miraculous. They had been doing something worse, something so competent and so quiet that no one had noticed it was happening until it stopped. Torek closed the casualty report and stared at the wall of the transit car. A Kirith child was playing a game on a handheld device in the seat across from him. The child was making small, happy sounds. Torek watched the child's claws tap the screen and thought about the children on Vesca 3, and did not think about what he had voted for 6 weeks ago. He thought about it anyway. The Concord was still functioning. Technically, sessions were held, votes were taken, resolutions were passed, but the machinery was grinding in ways that produced sparks instead of motion. 3 more species had withdrawn in the past 2 weeks. Their statements were variations on the same theme, 4 words that had become the most dangerous sentence in the galaxy. We thank the Concord. Helena Vasquez's words, spreading, multiplying, each repetition a small, precise cut. The Dravesh communion was hemorrhaging money. Their economy, it turned out, had been running on tariffs collected from human trade routes. Tariffs the humans had paid without complaint for decades, because the cost of arguing was higher than the cost of paying. Without the routes, without the trade, without the quiet subsidy of human commerce flowing through Dravesh-controlled waypoints, the communion's budget had a hole in it the size of a small moon. Councillor Hosh had not attended sessions in 8 days. Rumor said he was in meetings with communion financial ministers. Rumor said the meetings were not going well. The Aelori had attempted to reverse engineer the threshold corridors. Their best physicists had studied the energy signatures, analyzed the transit data, run simulations for 3 weeks. Facilitator Owen had delivered the results to the Elder Council in a classified briefing that Torek was not supposed to know about, but did. We assumed their science was derivative of ours, Owen had said, their skin a flat defeated gray. It was not. Their FTL physics developed along a parallel track. In some areas, they are ahead of us. We cannot replicate the threshold corridors. Not in a year. Possibly not in a decade. The silence after that statement had lasted a long time. Torek requested a private meeting with Helena Vasquez. He did it through personal channels, not Concord ones. He used his own name, not his title. He wrote the request in simple language, without diplomatic flourish, because Helena had always preferred directness, and because he no longer had the energy for performance. She agreed. She named the place, a small station at the edge of human space called Meridian Point, neutral ground, a trading post that served both Concord and non-Concord species. Torek took a personal transport. He did not tell the Concord he was going. The station was clean, modern, and efficient in the way human-built things tended to be. No ornamentation, no history carved into the walls, just good lighting and surfaces that worked. Torek found Helena in a small meeting room with a view of open space. She stood when he entered. She looked the same. That was the thing that unsettled him. He had expected something, anger, weariness, the visible weight of what she'd done. But Helena Vasquez looked like a woman who had finished a long project and was already working on the next one. She was calm, the way people are calm when the hardest decision is behind them. Torek, she said, not ambassador, his name, Helena. They sat across from each other. No aides, no translators. They spoke in Concord Standard, which Helena spoke flawlessly, because she had spent 22 years learning to live inside a system that had never planned to let her belong. Your border colonies, Torek said. He had not planned to start with this, but it came out anyway. Our people are dying. I know, Helena said. I'm sorry about that. The transition should have been longer. Your health ministry made a mistake. You could send the doctors back. I could ask. They might volunteer. Humans are like that. She paused. But that's not why you're here. No, it wasn't. What would it take, Torek said, to bring you back? Helena looked at him, not through him, not past him, at him. The way you look at someone you respect enough to give a real answer to, instead of a diplomatic one. Back to what? She said. The Concord, The chamber. Your seats are still there. The emblem can be reactivated. We could repeal the resolution. I have the votes. Not enough yet, but I'm close. I can get you enhanced representation. Observer status on the Elder Council. Real participation, not the performance we've been giving you. Helena listened. She did not interrupt. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Torek, you're asking the wrong question, she said. You're asking if we'll come back to your house. But we built our own. And the door is open. To everyone. Including you. But we're not walking back through yours. He had expected this. He had hoped for something else. The Concord could still work, he said. With reforms. With real changes. It could, she agreed. But not because we come back and prop it up. It works because you fix what's broken. That's your job. It was always your job. We just kept doing it for you because we wanted to belong. And you let us because it was free. She wasn't angry. That was what broke something in Torek. He could have handled anger. Anger meant she still cared enough to fight. This wasn't anger. This was a woman who had closed the door behind her and did not plan to look back through it. They talked for another hour. About logistics. About the plague response. Helena offered to facilitate a request for volunteer human doctors. No strings attached, because humans were like that. About trade. About the future of a galaxy that now had 2 frameworks instead of 1. Torek returned to the Concord Spire that evening. The transit car was empty. He sat in the same seat he always sat in, and looked out the window at the stars, and tried to calculate when, exactly, the Concord had lost the humans. Not 6 weeks ago, not at the vote. Much earlier. A slow loss. Invisible, happening in the spaces between sessions and votes and speeches that no one was listening to. He entered the grand chamber. It was empty. No session scheduled. The lights were on standby, casting everything in a dim amber glow. He walked to the human section. The desks were there. The nameplates were gone. Someone had removed them. Torek didn't know when. He put his hand on one of the desks. It was cold. He stood there for a long time. The humans had not been the junior members of the Concord. They had not been an emerging species earning its place. They had been the only ones who still believed the promise the Concord had been built on, that different species could come together as equals and build something greater than any of them could build alone. The elder species had not just lost an ally. They had killed the last people in the galaxy who believed in them. Torek pulled his hand off the cold desk and walked out of the chamber, and did not look at the dark section of the wall where Earth used to be. 6 months after the walkout, Oryx Station held the first summit of the Threshold Alliance, and the galaxy sent everyone it had to watch. The station was a human-built megastructure anchored at a deep space crossroads, a point where 6 threshold corridors converged, like rivers meeting at a delta. It was enormous, not in the ancient ornamental way of the Concord Spire, with its carved stone and 12,000-year-old architecture designed to make visitors feel small. Oryx Station was enormous in a functional way. Clean lines, wide corridors, natural light piped through solar arrays. Gardens, actual gardens, with soil and green things growing, in the public spaces between meeting halls. It looked like a place built by people who intended to live in it, not to worship in it. 22 species had signed the Threshold Alliance Charter. The Tessic, the Uri, the Thalami, the Vren, 16 others whose names the Concord had never bothered to learn, and humanity, who had built the corridors and the station and the framework, and had then done something the elder species found deeply confusing. They had not put themselves at the top. The Alliance operated on a rotating council. Equal representation. 1 species, 1 vote. Humanity held no special authority, no elder status, no permanent seat of power. They had built the house, opened the door, and then sat down at the same table as everyone else. Torek Vassin arrived at Oryx Station, leading the Concorde's diplomatic delegation, and the irony of his position was not lost on him. 6 months ago, he had voted to strip humanity of its assets. Now, he was standing in a human-built station, wearing a visitor's badge, waiting to be received. He had fought for this mission. The Dravesh had wanted sanctions. The hardline Aelori faction had wanted to declare the Alliance an illegal entity and threaten member species with expulsion from the Concorde. Torek had spent 3 months in backroom negotiations, burning political capital he'd spent decades accumulating, to convince the Elder Council that the only path forward was engagement. "We go to them," he had told the Council. "We go to them because they are not coming to us, and pretending otherwise is a luxury we can no longer afford." The Council had agreed, reluctantly. Torek suspected they agreed not because they understood, but because the economic data had become impossible to ignore. The Concorde's trade volume had dropped 18%. The Dravesh communion was in a financial crisis. Piracy in the unpatrolled border systems had tripled. 7 more species were in quiet talks with the Alliance. The Concorde was not collapsing. It was too old and too large to collapse quickly. But it was shrinking. And for an institution that had defined itself as the entirety of galactic civilization, shrinking and dying were the same thing. Helena Vasquez met Torek at the station's reception hall. She was wearing something different, not the dark formal wear of Concorde diplomacy, but a simpler outfit, lighter colors, something that looked comfortable rather than performative. She smiled when she saw him. It was a real smile. That was the worst part. "Ambassador Vassin," she said, formal, but warm. "Ambassador Vasquez." She introduced him to the Alliance Council. The Tessek delegate, a small, bright-eyed being named Pika, who barely reached Torek's knee, shook his hand with genuine enthusiasm. The Awori representative bowed in the traditional style. The Vren delegate, an insectoid whose species had been dismissed by the Concorde as pre-industrial until humans had discovered their advanced biological computing methods, clicked a greeting that Torek's translator rendered as, "Welcome to the table, friend." Friend. Not elder, not superior, not even equal in the careful, measured way the Concorde used the word. Just friend. Torek presented the Concorde's offer in the main council chamber. He had rehearsed it for weeks. Full repeal of Resolution 11447. A formal, public apology from the Elder Council. Enhanced human representation in the Concorde. A permanent seat on the Elder Council, the first ever offered to a non-elder species. Resource-sharing agreements. Joint infrastructure projects. Everything the humans should have had from the beginning. Offered now, because the alternative was watching the galaxy reorganize around a new center of gravity that the Concorde did not control. He believed in it. He meant every word. The Alliance Council listened with the respectful attention of people who had learned, through long experience, the difference between words and actions. When Torek finished, Helena thanked him and called a recess for deliberation. The debate lasted 4 hours. Torek waited in a lounge that overlooked the station's central garden. He watched a maintenance crew, human and Tessek working side by side, repair a water recycling unit. They were laughing about something. One of the humans was teaching a Tessek a card game during their break. The Tessek was losing and appeared delighted about it. Helena found him there. She sat down across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Through the window, the maintenance crew dealt another hand. "The council is split," Helena said. "Some want to accept. The Awori are optimistic. The Vren are cautious. The Ptolemy don't trust the Concorde, and may never trust the Concorde. And the humans? The humans are split too. Some of my people want to go back. They miss the Concorde. They miss the idea of it, this big, beautiful thing where everyone works together. They still believe in that. And you?" Helena looked at him, the same direct, honest gaze she'd given him at Meridian Point. No performance, no diplomacy, just a woman who had spent her life building bridges and had learned, the hard way, which ones could hold weight. "I believe in it too," she said. "I never stopped." But Torek, believing in something and walking back into a burning building because you love the architecture are two different things. The Concord isn't offering partnership. The Concord is offering to let us back in because it's realized it needs us. That's not the same thing. It's just dependency wearing a nicer suit. It could become respect. It could, over time, with real change. And that change needs to happen whether we come back or not. That's the part your council doesn't understand. They think bringing us back fixes the problem. We were never the problem. The problem is a 12,000-year-old institution that never learned the difference between leading and taking. Torek sat with that for a while. "What will the council decide?" he asked. "Something new," Helena said. The Alliance voted unanimously. They would not rejoin the Concord. They would not submit to its authority or accept its hierarchy. But they would engage, as partners, as equals. Bilateral treaties where both sides benefited. Shared infrastructure where the terms were mutual. Joint projects where the work and the credit were distributed fairly. A new relationship, not a restored one. Side by side. Torek accepted the decision with the grace of a diplomat, and the heaviness of a man who had hoped for more and knew he had earned less. He signed the bilateral agreement in the council chamber, his name next to Helena's, the Tessek delegates, and 20 other representatives of species the Concord had spent centuries overlooking. The signing ceremony was simple. No ancient rituals, no 12,000-year-old traditions. Just people putting their names on a document and meaning it. After the ceremony, Torek walked through Oryx Station alone. He wanted to see it, not the meeting rooms and diplomatic halls, but the station itself, the gardens, the corridors, the mess halls where Alliance staff ate together, species mixed without segregation by tier or rank. A Vren clicking patiently while a human tried to learn 3 words of their language, and Uri teaching a Falami child how to fold paper into shapes. A Tessek and a human arguing about a card game with the passionate intensity of people who would be friends for decades. He stopped at an observation window. The stars were the same stars visible from the Concord spire. The same galaxy, the same ancient light. A child ran past him, human, small, maybe 5 or 6 years old, chasing a Tessek child through the corridor. Both of them were laughing, that high, uncontrolled laughter of children who have no idea that the galaxy is complicated and unfair, and full of old institutions that mistake age for wisdom. The Tessek child had something the human child wanted. A toy maybe, a treat. It didn't matter. They were running and laughing, and they were going to be fine. Torek watched them disappear around a corner, and felt something open in his chest that had been closed for 6 months. Not relief. Not victory. Possibility. He returned to the Concord spire 3 days later. He took his seat. The business of governance continued, diminished, quieter, but continuing. On the main display wall, next to the Concord's ancient emblem, there was a new icon, the Threshold Alliance sigil, a simple design, a circle of stars with an open center, adopted because a Tessek artist had drawn it on a napkin during lunch, and everyone had liked it. 2 emblems, 2 frameworks, side by side on the wall. The human section of the chamber was still dark. The desks were still empty. The nameplates were still gone. Torek looked at that dark section and did not feel the cold behind his ribs anymore. The humans hadn't come back. They had done something harder. They had built a place worth going to. And then they had left the door open. Not for the galaxy to follow them. For the galaxy to choose. Below the chamber, in the corridors of the spire, a Kirith official walked past a Tessek trade delegate, heading to a meeting, about bilateral grain shipments routed through a threshold corridor. They nodded at each other. Small, polite, new. The galaxy hadn't broken. It had grown a second spine, and for the first time in 12,000 years, it was learning to stand up straight.